Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar about surface and volume tools. My name is Caroline, and I'm going to be your main host. I'm going to do the demo today. But along with me, I have my colleague Thomas. So today then, what we're going to go through is the Naviate surface and volume tools. So the agenda for today is going to be a little bit of introduction, which we're doing right now. And then we're going to talk about the Civil 3D surface editing, what you can do in Civil and how that works. Hopefully we won't be any news for you, but might be some things that you don't really pay attention to. Then we're going to talk about Subsurface, and we're going to talk about Min and Max surface and what those are to create different versions. These are Naviate functionalities. And then we're going to finish with talking about volume calculations about the surfaces. So those are the points that I'm going to go through. So let's get started. So I'm just going to close this PowerPoint down, and you'll then see my Civil 3D. So let's start with Civil 3D tools when it comes to surface. So the interesting thing about surfaces is that it's something that everyone does. No matter the discipline that you're working with, you still have to consider your surface. You get your starting, you get your point clouds, you get your survey, and you need to combine these things. And it really doesn't matter if it's a small project or a large project or wherever it is, everything sort of revolves around the surface. It could also be that you want to export in the end, that you have to have a surface. So they keep coming back. So having a solid knowledge of the surface and how it works is a very good thing. So it's important to sort of spend time with it and making sure that you know how to handle your surface. So I'm going to start with a couple of functionalities that we have inside plain Civil and how that works. So I have two surfaces here. Now, my example today is going to be mostly about pipes. The functions that we have that I'm going to show from the Naviate point of view is up here on the terrain panel. And these are general functionalities, which means they will work with any Naviate license that you have. So even if my example right now is pipe, then I'm going to branch out a little bit, but mainly pipe corridors, it will work for any corridors, for any projects, these functionalities. It's all about finding the reason for using them. But a very common thing that we do is combining surfaces. In this case, I'm going to combine these two corridor surfaces that I have. I have my magenta one on the right. You can see it here in my 3D. And I have my green one here as well. So in Civil 3D, what we do is we paste surfaces. We paste them together. So I'm going to paste my surface up here. So I'm going to paste it straight up. I'm going to explain why I really don't recommend to do this, but it's just the easiest way of showing it right now. So I'm just going to select the second corridor, and then I'm going to do OK, and I get a pasted corridor. So to make this easy to follow, I'm going to isolate this one. So we only see this corridor surface. Now, when we do it like this, when we paste surfaces like this, the surface that you paste will control everything where it is present. So if I zoom out a little bit and I turn this around, we can see that everywhere that my surface is, why can't I seem to get it to turn? Turning in 3D is always hard. Everywhere that this surface, the second corridor is connected, I can bring it up in object viewer, that's easier usually. That corridor determines how it looks. So when you paste surfaces with Civil 3D, you get an automatic priority. Just be aware that is how it works. What we can do if we have this and we want to sort of have a better understanding here is we can start manipulating the surface. And the tools that we have available to us are up here on the ribbon. So under Edit Surface, we have tools where we can add and we can remove stuff. So I want to delete a couple of points here that I don't really want to be a part of this surface. I'm just clicking on this to remove the points. Hit Enter, and I can see the corridor or the surface changing. So I can alter my surface like this. I can also delete lines. Just be aware, if you delete lines in the middle of a surface, like this, you will get a hole. You can see the hole on the right side here. So deleting lines removes the entire triangle. Now, a pet peeve of mine that most people that have known me for a while knows is that I really don't like undo. I really don't think you should use it inside Civil 3D. I've seen too many issues with it. So I'm going to revert back to how it was just a few seconds ago without using undo, because mostly you can do that in Civil. And it's important to know how to do it without using undo, because undo sometimes messes with your files. So in this case, these types of edits can be found under surface properties. So you can find your surfaces, you can find everything you've done, and I can remove the deletion here. Just hit OK, and I can rebuild the surface, and I'm back. Now, the benefit of knowing this way, instead of using undo, is you can do it anywhere. You can do it anytime. Even if you open this 2 weeks from now, you can still do this operation. You can add lines under edit surface as well. So I can add line. If I know that I should have a line over here, I get a triangle side like that. So I can sort of manipulate this surface to make it look better. But the downside of doing this is that since this is a corridor surface, as soon as I update my corridor, I rebuild the corridor, these edits might not be effective anymore. They could be fine, but they might not be. So just be aware that if this is the type of edits that you want to do at the end of a project, the very, very end before you deliver it, then this is a good way of doing so the final tweaks. But if you're considering doing this in the middle of the project, there are better ways of doing this. So in this case, I want to come back to how it looked before. Again, I don't want to do undo, so I'm not going to go into the style. That was not my intention. I'm going to go into surface properties, because everything I do with my surface, including my paste, I can remove from here. I can remove them temporarily by unticking them, or I can remove them by removing them from definition. And OK, rebuild the surface, and I'm back to how it was before. So these types of things are always stored inside your drawing that you want to do. So let's come back to my main file. So I'm just going to end the isolation here. So come back to my main file. So we talked about paste. Now, Naviate has a very good method called MinMax that I'm going to come to in just a second about pasting corridors together. But another method that we use for paste for is not only for combining surfaces, it's also for copying surfaces. So in this case, I have a inner yard here that I've done, a very simple surface with a couple of different elevations on it. And I want to have a substructure of this surface. So I basically want to have layers from this surface that I've done. And I want to have copies. Now, the easiest way to copy one surface with Civil 3D is to create a surface, paste it, and then move it. So I'm just going to show you how we do that. I'm going to create the surface. I'm going to call this level 1. The same edit possibilities under definition are also here in toolspace. So I can do here, paste surface, same functionalities. I'm going to find my yard. I'm going to paste it on top of this. If I now want to move it, I can do raise lower, and I'm just going to lower this one 1 meter. Everything in this one is meter. If you're not sure who's listening to this, but just so you know, everything in this file is in meters that we do. So here we can see we have the copy, and the copy is dynamically linked. So if I move something, if I remove this line that I have here, we can see that my copy, the green one down here, updates automatically. So they are linked together, which is good. But if I want to do multiple layers, I need to do this copy, create, copy, paste every time. So I have an easier way of doing this. I'm going to remove this one. I'm going to use delete. And that is to use the Naviate functionalities. Now we're coming into the Naviate functionalities. Now all the functions that I'm going to use today are up here on our terrain panel. So the Naviate tab and then our terrain panel. And the first one here I'm going to use is Subsurface. We have 2 versions of Subsurface. One is it's an older version that we are now calling Subsurface Vertical, and then we have the normal Subsurface. So Subsurface Vertical can create copies of a surface straight up and down. So there's no slopes, just straight up and down. Then you can use Subsurface. You can do that with Subsurface as well, but Subsurface is just easier dialogue. You don't get that many options in here. So I select my base surface. I set a name for it. I set a style in my drop down, and I say how much should this be lowered. So 1 meter below, I want to have my second one. I say level 2. I set a style, and I say this one should be 4 decimeters below that. So the individuals, the distances is between the different surfaces. If I do this many times and I know how I want this set up, I don't need to type these in every time. I can import a finished layout. I can also export it. So what you can do is you can set everything up one time, do XML export, and then next time you're doing it, use XML import, which I'm going to do right now. It goes out to our support folders. So I'm just going to find the one called create paste surface. And then I get a already finished layout on how to do these surfaces. And it's always good to have these sort of settings, so you don't need to do it over and over again. So every time you want to do something over again, then you really should consider using the settings functionalities here. My base surface will be yard, and I'm also going to create volume surface from here. So it's going to create volume surface directly, what I'm going to do for my surfaces. It's creating all my copies. We can see them in 3D, and it's also creating the volumes and adding them to the volumes dashboard. So I directly see what type of volumes I have between these surfaces. So straight up and down copies that you want to do. So in this case, I'm using it for volume calculations, but I can of course use them for anything where I want to have copies of my surfaces. So that is subsurface vertical that we want to do. I'm just going to close this one. I'm actually going to remove these surfaces. And one thing that we usually get a question for, depending on how much you've worked in Civil 3D, we usually get a question about these orange tabs. So the orange little tabs there, they mean that these surfaces are used somewhere. So you'll see that I don't have delete in the right click. And that is because they are used somewhere. In this case, they are used in my volume surfaces. So on the volume surface, I have delete because they are not used anywhere else. But that is why we have those orange tabs. So if I want to delete these surfaces, I need to select them. So I really should have selected it. That was my intention. Select them all by right click and then use delete to remove them. Now, selecting the objects via tool space is also a good idea because then you're sure that you're not selecting anything else, that you're not accidentally selecting something that was important in your drawing. So also a handy tip to select stuff from your tool space instead. So if we come back to our subsurface vertical for copying straight up and down, subsurface, the normal subsurface, we're making copies but also adding more slopes. So same sort of situation where you have your surface list, you can import a settings file. So you can create the settings here, but we also have daylight slope and we have bottom slope. So daylight slope is on the side and bottom slope is the offset we do out along the bottom. I'll show you where that is. But I still need to have a base surface, so I need to have my yard up there. At the bottom, I can also select to do a datum surface, and that is going to slope back up towards my existing ground. So I can calculate the entire cut, and then I can do the fill surfaces. So that is the idea here. I can also create the volume surfaces if I want, the same way that we did before. I'm not going to do that right now, but I just want to do it here. One thing about the volume surfaces, we're going to come to our Naviate volumes, and you can go straight from this calculation here or this creation here to the Naviate volumes. So this tag that we have here means that it's going to configure the Naviate volumes dialog. And you're going to see that. If you haven't seen it before, then I'm going to show that in just a few minutes. But right now, I'm going to show that in a different method. So I'm just not going to create the volume surfaces. So subsurface here, we get these daylight slopes. I'm going to click OK, and it's going to create. It's still creating copies of the surfaces downwards. Right now, they don't have a style, so I just see them as these 3D polylines. But to illustrate this, I'm going to use this line here and create a quick profile. And it's really a good idea to keep track of your naming. you'll notice here that I'm going to get quite a lot of surfaces once I'm done. And to know exactly what they're named is very important, because sometimes you just need to go through these kinds of lists, and if you don't know what they're called, yeah, I can't help you with that. So consider your naming, make sure you use naming conventions because it is very important. So here is my quick profile. So now we can see what it's done. It's actually taking my yard surface up here, and it's copied down, and it's copied also outwards. So you see that my yard surface ends here, and the slope here is the bottom slope. And then we have the daylight slope along the side. So those are the two slopes that I could measure, or that I could set, and then I have the distance between them. Now everything here is still dynamic. So if we take a look at the right side here, you can see that it's doing a little top there in the middle. And if we go to our 3D, the dashed lines that I see here are actually my profile lines. So the reason for this is that I have a rogue triangle here. So if I change this surface, if I just drag this line out a little bit, we can see that my top surface changes, and also my copies updates that directly. So everything is dynamic and everything is linked. So all changes you do are automatically sort of moved along into the chain of these surfaces. So everything is linked. Also, a good thing that Subsurface does is to get the surface inside a group. So surface group 1, these are my subsurfaces. So we get a little bit of organization here on your surface at least. And organizing your surfaces is important to do. So those were my subsurfaces that I wanted to show you. Copy and creating a substructure. If we come back to our corridors. So for the corridor that I did here, I wanted to combine those corridors. I'm just going to zoom out my 3D view as well. So I wanted to combine these two corridors. I'm actually going to save my drawing just because you never know. So to combine these corridor surfaces, it's important that we need to have the lowest of them. Or it could be the highest, depending on what you're going to do, but generally it's the lowest area of them. Because combining the actual pipe corridors is usually a lot more work than it's worth. So it's easier to combine the surfaces. In my file right now, I have 6 corridors. I have storm and sanitary in one area, and I have district heating in another area. And I need to combine the corridors of all of these 6 corridors, the surfaces, which I'm going to do. And to do this fairly easy, we have a new or a updated. It's a new command, but it's been around for a while, a previous version of it. But we updated this in spring. So right now it looks like this. So we get a dialog box instead for our MinMax. So the MinMax creates both a minimum surface. If you used this before, the previous command created only the minimum surface. So where they overlapped, it only created that area. This version that we have actually combines the surfaces as well. So it's actually pasting them together. So I'm going to explain a bit more, but I'm going to start this off because it does take a little while. It's not extremely slow, but it does take some time. So I'm just going to add the surfaces that I want to combine. A good idea is to add them by size, roughly by size, which is why I'm starting with my storm and sanitary because they are larger than my district heating ones. So I'm just adding the surface here that I want to add to my minimum complete trench surface. Click create surface, and we can see how it's going to build on the right side there in 3D. So what it's actually doing is going through these surfaces, comparing them to each other, finding the minimum, creating a minimum version or a minimum surface of where they are overlapping. And then it's pasting the surface on top of each other, making sure that it's keeping everything, that everything is the minimum surface of everything. So it is a lot of, not iterations, but it's going through a lot of different surfaces. That's why it takes a little bit of time. So just be aware when you run this, just let it sort of work its way and save the drawing before you run it. Always a good idea. So the result now is a complete surface, my complete trench that I have here. And if we take a look at it, I'm going to zoom into the crossway here. Everything is combined, everything is using this the lowest part of it. the better the surfaces are from the start, the better this complete one will be. If I just flip it up, we can see the different elevations of the different pipe networks that we have as well. So it's combining everything and moving through and doing that. Now, if I change something, so if I update something, like my corridor, because all my corridors are working from this trench. This is the Naviate pipe trench, if you haven't seen it before. If I change this one and say that I want to have another slope on one of the sides of this corridor, I can rebuild my corridors. You see down here, I have my 6 corridors. I'm just going to rebuild them all. That means that the corridors will be rebuilt and the corridor surfaces will be rebuilt. Now, some parts of this complete trench that I did are dynamic. So you'll see that it's starting to change, but we're not exactly sure if the overlaps will be the same. So if you do an update to these surfaces, the recommended workflow is to update the complete trench, the combined surface as well. And it's quite easy to update it, because if I run, not my subsurface, my MinMax, if I run my MinMax, I have the option up here to do select surface. And select surface means it's going to look through my file and see, I've done this one. The command knows it's done this one. So that's the one that I'm going to select. Click OK. And I get the selected surfaces. Now, I could add a surface here. If I get a new corridor trench, I could add this one. That's why it's still sort of bringing up. Do you want to do the same thing? Then I can just do create, and it's going to run through it again. And what it's actually doing, which is important to know, is that it's emptying the surface and adding new information in. So if you have references to the MinMax surface, if you used it as a data shortcut, if you used it in your profile, that will stay. So we're just replacing the information inside. And this is important when you use surfaces. If you've started using links to your surface, don't remove the surface. Empty the information in it, surface properties, and re-import information to that. But keep the name, keep the object, and it will be so much better for you. And now my surface is updated. And you can see that I have the sloping there. So MinMax to create combinations. Another very common sort of workflow or a common question where the answer is MinMax surface, let's put it like that, is for pipe trenches when you have a rock surface. Because for pipe trenches, if you want to do volume calculations for rock, I have my rock here. This is a section that is about up here on my corridors. I only want to have the rock volume that is below the road datum. So it is very common inside projects, if you have a rock surface and you have a road together with it, that you need to have an adjusted rock surface that is the lowest of these two. So that is something that is a very common thing that we encounter, that my customers encounter, and it's the same method, it's the same functionality, it's still the MinMax that you do. But in this case, I'm going to do it with adjusted rock. And I'm going to add my rock, and I'm going to add my road datum. So these two will be my surface here. You'll see that I have a create script. I'm going to explain what that is, but I'm going to start this because this takes a bit longer because there are more triangles. It's not larger, it's just more triangles, so it's a bit slower. But you'll notice that I have the create script there. If you do this process, especially if you have a rock surface, because rock surfaces tend to be quite large, or they could be quite large. If you know that, okay, this one will be a bit slower, and you're not really sure what's going to happen to your computer or how long time it's going to take, we recommend that you run it as a script. And especially that you run it as a script outside of Civil, because that's the idea with the script version that we have here. It's actually creating the script, and it's prepared to be run inside ACAD Core. ACAD Core is a, basically it's AutoCAD or Civil without the graphics. It's just a command line. If you've used AutoCAD long enough, you've been there before, and now we're sort of back there again. But for me, it makes sense for me if I just think of it as the command line for Civil 3D. I don't see anything, but it's doing everything that I can do on the command line. So that's the idea that you open it, because it is faster. It's faster, but it doesn't have to draw out all the graphics. So we have prepared this functionality to work for ACAD core, as with other functions. So that's something to remember. One thing, since I mentioned the licenses at the start, if you want to run it in ACAD core, you need to have an infrastructure license. That's the only ones of these that are a bit limited. The others run on infrastructure license or pipe, landscape, and road. But in particular, when it comes to the scripting part, we've limited that to the infrastructure license, just so you know. So now I have my rock surface. I'm just going to save this file, because it's always good to save the file. Just to illustrate what is actually done, I'm going to bring in this adjusted rock into my section. So I'm going to add my adjusted rock to my section. And I'm going to add a style. And this is tip, sort of a good idea. Sometimes it's good to have a highlighted or a stronger style. So, and it's very easy to do. You just do a copy of the style, and I set the line weight. This is never intended to be something that is printed, but it's just something so that I can see what I'm doing. So just to make sure that I can see what is the adjusted rock and what is not, I'm going to add this style to it. I'm going to click OK, and now it is very easy to follow my adjusted rock along the others. So a sort of an enhanced or a stronger style for profile, for section, it is a very good idea to have these kind of styles. But it's very easy to just do them on the fly as well. So this is what the min has done. Where there is rock, it's using rock. Where the road datum is below the rock, it's using that one. So this is the one that I'm going to use for my rock volume calculations, which brings me very nicely into volume calculations. So to do volume calculations in Civil 3D, standard Civil, when it comes to surfaces, we use Analyze and Volumes Dashboard. We create these volume surfaces, and I'm going to do one from EG, from existing ground, to my trench. So my base is going to be my EG. Again, aren't you happy that you're completely on top of your naming conventions with your surfaces? So it's very easy to find the surface that you're looking for. Of course you are. So EG, complete trench, and I get this volume here. And I also want to do one from rock to trench. So from my rock surface to my trench floor. So my base will be my adjusted rock, and my comparison surface will be my complete trench. And now I have the two volumes here. But one of the downsides here is that they are actually overlapping. Inside this EG trench, which is the whole trench volume, we actually also have the rock calculation. So this is a very sort of simple way of doing volume calculations, but the minute you want to do something more complex and more sort of compare different things and add and subtract different volumes, then you need to do this manually in here. Which brings me to our Naviate volume calculation. So the Naviate volume calculations require these volume surfaces, so it's always a good idea to do them anyway. But I'm going to open the Naviate volume tools. If you've used this one before, so we have volumes here, volume and intervals. If you use this one before, we've done a lot of work in making this faster this time around. So in 24.1, which is also 23.11, it is extremely much faster, depending on your file, of course, but it's very much faster. One of the things that we've done is that we've added a start option, because otherwise it's starting to recalculate as soon as you open it. But right now it's you can select how you want to start it. So I want to open this one with a clean report. So I don't want to use anything. I just want to do a clean report, click OK, and it's just going to be empty. So it's easy to sort of bring up this one. We also have, just be aware, we have auto recompute and we have the recompute button. So just determine how you want this to handle. Auto recompute means everything is sort of recomputing all the time. And I don't really like that. I like to recompute when I want to. So I'm usually using this recompute button. But every row that I enter here will be one volume. So for my EG trench, I'm actually only interested in the cut volumes. And then I'm going to add a rock there. And again, I'm only interested in the cut volumes. And then I want to use a calculation over here. So I'm going to say subtract the row below. So my soil here, my rock there, and subtract the rock from my soil cut. Recompute. We also add a little when you start it, so you can see where it is. So you know sort of, okay, how long have I waited? Has it crashed? Or should I just wait a little bit more? So we have a sort of progress here. And now I have my volumes here that actually split from each other. So that is the sort of the easy way of doing this. There's also the fact that with our rock cut, we usually want to split that one. We want to have 0 to 1 meter rock, which we want to measure, at least in our Swedish project, we usually want to measure that in 2D area. And everything below 1 meter we want to measure in 3D volume. And we can split that. But I don't need to do this manually every time. So if I know that I have a method, I can do a volume settings from file. So I don't need to do this sort of setup. I can do import volume settings. And I have one that I prepared yesterday. So I'm going to import my report surface volumes. I just want to import everything. And then I just want to make sure that I'm using the correct surface. That's why it's red, because I just want to make sure that I'm using the correct surfaces. I can export with this button. So that is what I did yesterday when I was preparing for this. So in this one, I have my fill, I have my cut, I have my rock cut from 0 to 1 meters, the first one, and then I have everything else. Recompute needed, so I'm going to start my recompute. So it's recomputing everything in here. So that I can get these values. So for my rock cut under 1 meters is actually the 2D area here that I'm interested in. And for my rock cut over 1 meter, I'm interested in the volume over here. So you can get all this information out and you can do with them whatever you like. So a couple of different methods of getting this out. We have those here up on the top. So we can export to CSV, so you get it out in Excel. I'm going to do a 2D hatch. So I'm going to illustrate where we have these different volumes. So I'm just going to click this 2D hatch button. I can do this as 2D hatch and 3D mesh. So there's 2 different ways. I'm going to do 2D hatch today. And I get a property set with this information as well on top of that hatch. So I'm just going to create this. It's creating here in the background, and it's actually not close in the dialog. So I've learned that I need to keep track of when it's done, because I've been waiting here for a while and then I realized it's actually done. So that's why I keep my mouse over the OK, because it's going to highlight when it's back. So now I see my hatches here in the background. I can also add a results to table. And I really like this one because that means that I get first of all, I get a table in my drawing. So I'm just going to place this table here. And it's going to look a bit weird the first time, but I can just drag that one. It's actually going to come back to my dialog. So I'm just going to do OK because I'm done in here right now. So I'm just going to do OK. So the table here is the result of whatever I did, but it's also a storage for the calculation that I did. So if I want to do the same calculation, I can do edit volume table, and I can click on this one and actually come back to the volume calculation that I just did. Now, the reason why I like this is that that means that I can have multiple different volume calculations with multiple different surfaces or different versions of this. And as long as I have a table for each, I'm going to save this setup. So I can come back in and I can take a look at it and I can do changes and I can update and I can do all that. So every one of these tables represent one type of calculation that I have up here. And that is really nice to have that in your drawing. Just remember that you need to update it. So you need to recompute it when you have it up here. The hatching that we did, I'm just going to show you in the plan. So we can actually see the hatching here. You can see the cyan colored where I have the deep rock cut. I have the yellow where I have the lower rock cut, and the red where it's only the soil cut. So it's a very nice representation of how everything looks. Good. I said that this one was very fast, and I want to, we have 2 more things that I want to show you. First of all, I'm going to show you the actual numbers because I had a colleague do some benchmarks. So I'm just going to share this one, it's easier. So this is actually a test that he did with a couple of different files on how fast the recompute was. So compared to both 22.3 and 23.3, the recompute for 24.1 is ridiculously more efficient. 2D hatch is better, not quite the same, but it's very much better for the larger files. Now the files that he was using, I'm just going to show you an example of this. Couple different sizes of them, but the major one, the larger one, I'm going to show you that one, just so you can see about the same that we are using. So we tried to sort of do at least larger versions to see how fast it will go. But it's very nice to see that the work that we did, I'm going to close that one, actually made sense in that we actually got quite a lot of better numbers for this one. So it feels really good. So as I said, if you used it before and you felt like this is not useful, please give it one more chance, because we've done a lot of work with it. So it's much better to faster to use it, at least. Good. I think that was it. That was my final functionality that I wanted to show you.
Okay. Thanks, Caroline. Thank everyone for joining, and see you next time.
See you.